Hello, I'm Elon, better known as the Warbler, and thank you for checking out my very first video content on the old YouTubes. This video is an audio interview that I did with William Schiele, the author of Tears of the Assassin, which was published, I think, last month by Inkshares. So during that interview, there were a bunch of issues with my microphone, and so there are points when he is inaudible, points when I am inaudible, so the entire video is subtitled to make the viewing experience much more pleasant. At the end of the video, there's going to be links, wherever links pop up on YouTube, to Bill's Twitter, to the book on Inkshares and on Amazon, and to the review itself on thewarblerbooks.com. So yeah, thanks again. I hope that you enjoy the conversation with Bill, and stay tuned for many more of these kinds of videos. Thanks. I honestly enjoyed your book quite a bit. I thought it was so refreshing to read a piece whose protagonist kind of was so stuck in his ways that given the opportunity, he just given the opportunity for success, he just stayed the course. Or success in the eyes of like a standard story ending. He was like, no, I'm committed to these decisions. Because so often we have, people fitting into the almost fairy tale endings.
Well, I certainly wanted to create the protagonist in a manner that would, in the beginning, the reader would get to know him. The reader would get to understand his sort of background and how his mindset may very well have been formed by that. Mm-hmm. And then to have him also have emotional as well as, practical consequences for his violence. I didn't want the violence to be sort of excused or permission by some other authority. Mm-hmm. I think he chooses to be violent for sure, but I wanted to kind of paint it that he didn't have a lot of other choices, and of course we all have a choice other than to be violent, but that this particular character has grown up with that as a family tradition, mm-hmm. and that when he faced similar circumstances of frustration, he acted what would be inappropriately, but would be kind of almost what the reader might expect from a character who had those experiences.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I also wanted to explore the guilt of that violence, that there is a psychological and emotional kind of reaction to all that, which he kind of struggles with as a youngster, trying to, go hunting and all that with his father, but has to atone for in his after his accumulation of these violent acts.
Mm-hmm. It builds pressure inside of him.
Yeah, I wanted the protagonist to have to, experience those things, so that by extension the reader would kind of, feel that to whatever degree the character does.
Well, there's this kind of fascinating play. Oh, sorry.
No. So that was definitely just one of the factors that I wanted to kind of build into this protagonist's psyche.
Absolutely. There seems to be a kind of, there's a hyper-competency in him. He turns off this emotional switch, essentially, when he's performing. And then he, once the deed is done, it all kind of collapses on top of him, and he's unable to sort of open that valve and release that angst and that anguish from committing these acts of violence that he knows to be sort of crimes against nature, until he is in a comfortable space, like, you know, the arms of his mother essentially are being replaced by other women in the world. It's nice because, well, nice is should be qualified. It's nice to read that kind of character, because so often we see exceptionally violent types or hyper-competent killers with no remorse, with no regrets, and who can, you know, just as easily hit the bar after a job. But there's this human element of your character that is sort of eminently relatable in one sense, but totally foreign in another.
Yeah, I actually appreciate that description, because I think that is insightful to sort of what I wanted people to feel. Relatable in that he represents what most people would feel if they did this. And then the fact that he's doing it, okay, well, that's in the story. And I think that I would say that sort of turn off the emotions and perform and deal with the issues that are raised later is certainly something that I think is prevalent in our culture, and certainly something that's been my experience, say, with sports, right? Mm-hmm. When the game is on, you don't complain about this sore ankle or being tired or being, upset. You just play, man. You play the game, and then later on you can grouse about whatever or complain. But when the game is on and practice is on, and we are immersed in this effort to either compete or develop our skills and abilities in order to compete, there is a switch, if you will, that you've got to just kind of turn that off, and it's time to play. And I think athletes would be able to recognize what Dygert is doing when, he puts on his fight face or his game face or whatever, versus later on then sort of having those emotions well up in a way that what I wanted to do, Elon, was, you mentioned the bar, was I wanted him to actually grieve in the right way. Mm-hmm. For a number of years, I taught a course here in Rochester called Death and Dying. And teaching that course and working with students to have them better understand the role and the function of death in our society and how people react to it, actually informed a lot of what went into this book, because so often people seek to avoid grief, and mm-hmm. they will, self-medicate or misdirect the emotions of grief rather than actually acknowledge them and experience them and atone for them. And the crux of the matter is that when you do let yourself grieve, whether it's the loss of a family member or a friendship or a lover or, a job, a pet, whatever it is that someone really loves and then loses, when they go through that grief process, they are able to feel those emotions, acknowledge those emotions, experience those emotions, and then pass through them.
Yeah, it's kind of like individuation,
and move on with their life. Yeah.
The Carl Jung's concept there of acknowledging the shadow, so to speak. It's interesting that you bring in your experience teaching this class, because I wanted to actually ask what kind of research you did when you were working on the novel, and doing that kind of like emotional research obviously is just part of living one's life, but it sounds like you had this sort of I won't say unique because there are a lot of professors and instructors out there, but a wonderful opportunity to crunch a lot of numbers about the process of processing. Did you teach any other classes? Did you have any other academic environs that helped sort of inform the novel?
Well, I also teach exercise physiology and anatomy physiology. So that topic certainly helped inform some of the I don't know, the physiology and sort of some of the anatomical things that kind of happen in some of the violent scenes and some of the fight scenes. You know, for example, when he strips that guy in the bar of the brass knuckles, and he does so by putting pressure on the median nerve. So the median nerve is the nerve that is the motor neuron for all the flexors of the hand. And with a fast and forceful pressure on that nerve, you can loosen the grip. And that's what he does to sort of get the brass knuckles off. Now, for a lot of people, they might just, read through that and say, but I wanted to make sure it was anatomically correct.
that kind of authenticity is really great.
Yeah, and I think that I also taught a course in personal self-defense. So, teaching people not so much a belt level martial art, but very practical skills and abilities that would allow one to defend themselves against an attacker and pretty much figure out how to escape and be able to counter movements that are what attacker typically would do. And so that was a physically active class. So, I'd have like 20 to 25 students in there. And, we'd be practicing attacks and practicing counter moves and doing fitness just so that they were strong and fit and capable as well. That makes a huge difference. But the notion that that one can learn to be able to have a set of skills and abilities that become reactions in the moment when one is suddenly physically accosted was what we had the students kind of develop through a bit of repetition. Mm-hmm. So when Dygert has his, he's a wrestler. He took karate at the YMCA. He did modern army combatives. All of those kind of inform the skills and abilities that he has that end up being utilized each time he sort of finds himself in a bit of a violent interchange. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I wanted to take a few steps back. We sort of jumped right into one of the more interesting bits of the novel, talking about Dygert's character. And thank you, by the way, for correcting my pronunciation. I kept reading it as Dygert, but I'm happy to know that it's Dygert. I wanted to know a little bit more about your background as a writer, if this is your first novel, if you've been working on it for a long time, sort of what got you into telling the story of Tears of the Assassin.
Yeah, so I have been a creative writer since, teenage years. And over the years, there have been times when I've put more effort and less effort into it as other things in my career and family life have sort of, taken precedent. But I would say that in the last 5 years, I really sort of decided that if I'm going to do this, I want to do it. I've been in writing groups enough. I've been writing character studies and character stories and shorter pieces and children's stories. When my children were very young, I would do a lot of storytelling with my kids. So I knew that the thing I love best in terms of entertainment is a thriller novel. An action-adventure movie kind of thing, that sort of thing where you have a protagonist who's under pressure and and has a lot of tension and has to think on their feet and react to situations that happen with skills and abilities. And so coming upon this, I thought, well, I think I can create that kind of a character, and I think I can put that kind of a character into a protagonist. And then I being familiar with the genre and a number of, outstanding authors, I just thought I want to find that a couple of things that were unique. And so the whole element of the protagonist, I wanted him to be someone who was not a three-letter government agent. He doesn't have the government's permission to be doing what he's doing. So then I wanted the antagonist. I definitely did not want the antagonist to be an Islamic terrorist. I wanted something other than that. And so I realized that the antagonist has to be powerful, has to be determined, has to be a formidable foe, and has to be someone who, what I wanted to reflect, was detached because of their wealth and power. Where Dygert feels the pain, the antagonist has no need to feel the pain because he's bought his way out of it long ago. And I think that kind of reflects a bit of angst in our society as we see concentrating wealth in a smaller and smaller group of people, and a larger and larger group of people finding themselves at the margins of our economy and struggling with that. So I thought, okay, well, here's kind of a sort of a generalized theme in which to place the story, which will have all the hallmarks of a thriller. That the protagonist is up against great forces that are very difficult to overcome, and that there is both a personal kind of stake as well as a more global, or at least national kind of stake as well. So what Crepusculus is planning to do with the economy, as well as the issues surrounding his mother, you have these two driving forces then that sort of motivate and guide his behavior. So I just thought, okay, I think I can pull all that together, and I think I can find the words and the phrases and the emotions to hold the reader's attention so that the story is an experience. I don't really expect people to remember this or remember that or remember what Dygert said, as much as to say, wow, that was a great story. the experience is more the end point than any specific kind of information. And Elon, I'll tell you this, it's a lot different than when I teach. When I teach, I've got specific learning objectives, goals and information and understanding that students should know at the end of this lesson, this experience, and I'd be able to assess that. Here, I don't want to assess anybody's knowledge. I just want them to say, wow, that was cool. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, there's a really interesting sort of parallel between the way you describe it and my experience in reading it, which was that, there was, for a great majority of the book, there was no clear antagonist. It was sort of, there were various forces pushing David into the lifestyle, and his motivations were changing, and there was kind of, okay, so his mom needs money for the house. He's been put in trouble with the Russians because he was a bartender. There was he was a bar bouncer. There was the issue with the military group that he was in that was, conducting illegal activities. But there was never, until that sort of final third of the book, there wasn't a clear goal for him to point himself at. And I believe in my review I said something along the lines of he's like a very powerful arrow that's just been released. And you're right at the tip of it with with the flyer, and you don't see the target until right before you strike it. And I think that's a really interesting reading experience because it makes you begin to question the acts of violence the way David does. It makes you, because so much of that justifiable violence that we talked about earlier has to do with ends justifying the means. But when there's no clearly established ends, it seems very, the feelings are less certain about the activity, about, the end game is so unclear that you're like, okay, well, I'm just going to follow this guy as he blows stuff up and kills some people, and he's dispatching this and that, and he's incredibly competent. But man, like, where is this going? And so I spent a while as I was reading guessing, and I mean, I'm happy to inform you that I totally got my guesses wrong, which was super refreshing, because thrillers tend to follow a semi-formulaic path. But I really do think that Tears of the Assassin eschewed formula in a number of really important places to drive for experience instead. I checked out your website, incidentally, and it looked like there's going to be a sequel. Is that something you're working on right now?
Yes. The sequel is fully outlined, and I'm making progress on the chapters. And if I were to sort of typify it, I think that in the first novel, the idea was to introduce David Dygert and sort of have people have a good sense of understanding of his background, and then to introduce the sort of antagonistic group, and then there's a little reveal there at the end. But now the elements that are revealed at the end will kind of offer Dygert a choice of, do I remain independent or do I join forces? Do I look at the opportunities that are offered by what was revealed at the end there, or do I continue to resist this? And making that choice then will propel him into a world that he could never really do anything but imagine, and then find out whether or not he has the capability to survive in a world completely different than what he grew up in. And what I want to convey in that is that survival and success and continuing to be capable is a challenge in whatever environment you're in, whether impoverished or not. The issues of success and competence remain the same. And I will do this, though, while still fulfilling the requirements of, or the expectations of, an audience that enjoys an action-adventure story.
Yeah, it seems like
Dygert will have to...
Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was going to say, it seems kind of like, to be honest, I thought that he was killed at the end of the book, and I'm excited to know that he's not. I like that sort of question at the end. But it seems like he's proven himself as entirely competent in the realm of physical prowess, and any kind of sequel, as you're describing it now, it's going to be a little bit more intrigue-based. And I like I like Crepusculus as a villain because there's an element of Illuminati to it, which always excites me. But it also, I don't think that their motivation, carte blanche, can be described as evil, because they're not. I mean, they're shattering economies, or they would like to shatter economies. They're pulling the strings, but by and large, their desire to, say, upend the U.S. economy by tanking the dollar and raising their own their own currency. I don't think that it's entirely evil. Maybe that's just something kind of pragmatic in me, but an international currency does that. Like Bitcoin is a very interesting thing going on, and clearly that was an inspiration. The cryptocurrency was an inspiration for you in the book as well.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that there's gray areas for both the protagonist and the antagonist. Like an indiscriminate killer versus a shadowy organization whose desire is to advance beyond certain sort of traditional terrestrial needs, maybe.
Correct.
It's a very interesting dichotomy.
And I'm glad you kind of perceived it that way, because I would describe one as the protagonist, the other as the antagonist, rather than the good guy, the bad guy, the good guy, the evil guy. But rather, the grayness of it is exactly what Dygert is going to have to face when he perceives the crepusculists and the folks who sort of have control of him, because he was rendered unconscious with that final element. But when he regains consciousness, he's going to be in a totally different world. And I want him to have to contemplate, well, is this wrong, or is it really right? Would I be helping or not helping? The fact that Crepusculus is not above hiring assassins and using violence to forge its path, I think gives them that element of bad guyness. But what they're hoping to do and wanting to do and intending to do could have very powerful outcomes, right? Do away with the whole exchange, the global currency where, a dollar here is worth a dollar over there, or a digival here and a digival there, would change the whole power of the United States with its economy, and countries wouldn't have to weaken their currency to do better against another currency.
Yeah, it's a fascinating treatise on sort of globalism.
And I'm happy to sort of have that globalism come from a perspective of a corporation that already sees itself as global and already perceives the market, the needs of people, the goods and services, the forms of entertainment, everything that Omnisphere is able to provide, they see as global. And so the needs of America versus the needs of China versus the desires of Germany are all sort of superfluous to the needs of human beings. And so they will preach that kind of globalism, but at the same time, what the Klaus Ponzer character makes clear is that he wants power. He desires power, and he recognizes that power means more than money, and that it allows him to guarantee that he will always have plenty of money by being able to manipulate markets and even through this currency, manipulate governments with that kind of power.
Yeah, there's for me it draws a parallel to Dan Brown's most recent book, actually, Inferno, or I think that's his most recent book, in which the antagonist's desire is to release a sterility plague. And throughout the book, there's a sort of waffling with the World Health Organization and the Robert Langdon character about, overpopulation is a serious risk, and a sterility plague that doesn't select for any specific type of individual actually doesn't sound like the worst solution in the world. It would just render, a third of the world's population infertile. It would be passed down genetically, and then the world's population would stabilize at a healthy 4.2 billion, or some such. It was a fascinating discussion that carried through the book. And it never changed the fact that there were these puzzles, there was the thriller, there was an antagonist who was clearly an antagonist because they were doing this thing, but the fact that it was kind of morally ambiguous made it a much more interesting story for me, and there's definitely an element of that with Crepusculus, which kept me very interested.
That element, I'm glad you made that parallel, because that element will be much more deeply explored in this sequel, when Dygert and Ponzer have an opportunity to sort of directly discuss things. That will kind of be the mechanism under which those dichotomous views will be sort of challenged. So Ponzer sees everything from a eagle's eye point of view from up in the sky, and Dygert is down there under a rock, living a life that's like, well, wait a minute, and so that sort of contrast, I think, is going to be really fascinating to play out through the writing. I mean, like I say, I've outlined it. I'm working on the chapters. But I'll tell you, and I'm sure you're aware of this as a writer yourself, that it's not until you're right there at your keyboard and your mind is really in the two characters as you're working out the dialogue that the real experience occurs. And when that happens, then you are feeling the emotions of both characters. And you're finding the words of one who has this, well, of course life will be better if there's all this. And the other one who say, well, you've never even considered what it's like to be, down here living in an impoverished life. And then all the struggles that go along with that. And what you have are two contrasting worldviews that then are sort of colliding. So I think that's going to be hopefully something that comes across in the sequel as something that holds people's attention and sort of grabs them in an entertaining way.
Yeah, that sounds like a really great question to ponder. Will you be attempting to publish it with Inkshares again? Will you do another crowdfunding campaign?
Well, yes, that is my intention. The Inkshares experience was really quite something, because I had sought agents and I'd had some success with agents agreeing to look at it, but and I was close, to get a contract, but then for one reason or another it didn't. So it became kind of frustrating too, because so much of it is out of my control. So when the Inkshares opportunity was discovered, I thought, well, what's to lose at trying this? If it fails here too, well, then maybe really it isn't a very good book. But if I can generate interest in enough people, and they're drawn in by the initial chapters, then that seems like a plausible way to go. Inkshares basically says, look, we'll publish your book if you can prove there's a market for it, which to me makes a lot more sense than a publisher saying, oh, okay, we know you're a cool agent, you helped us with this, you helped us with that, you picked this, you picked that, okay, we'll do this. But by the way, you also bombed 30% of the time. So this way, Inkshares is saying, look, we will give you everything you need to do your campaign. The email, the website, the mechanisms for connecting with people, but you have to show us that people are interested in your story.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I don't know what's going to happen with the publishing market, but I would like to think that if this book is a success, that it would make a second Inkshares campaign even more successful, because I would have a readership then, and people could say, "Well, look at this book," and look at these reviews and look at these numbers and so on and so forth. Whereas this time around, first time around, I had none of that. So it was people going on faith.
Yeah. Well, they get a chance to read a sample or something like that.
Sure, yeah. And so I perceive myself continuing with Inkshares.
Well, that's great. They'll be glad to have another piece from you. It's a fascinating platform, and there's so much different kind of disruptive behaviors happening in publishing, with self-publishing, this variety of hybrid publishers, people who are just releasing stuff for free. There's so much happening. It'll be really interesting to see sort of where equilibrium lies in the future for the publishing world, because I think you're right. So much of traditional publishing is based on networking, is based on sweetening the deal and things like that, when it's not necessarily about the merit of the story. So
and I think that that the democratization of publishing, I think, is the term that Inkshares uses.
It's a good term. It's a good dream. I'll put it that way. I certainly hope that direction, that more folks capitalize on that as an idea, because it makes a lot of sense. It's a logical conclusion.
Well, it makes me start to think that, okay, there's authors that I know and that I like and that I would probably pick up anything they write. But if I was to consider a new author, and I was, in a bookstore, and I'm like, I've never heard of this guy before, and I'm reading the back of his book, then I might say, gee, I'd like to know more about him and be able to see about some sample chapters and so forth. The kind of thing that I can see on Inkshares.
Yes, certainly. So how far along do you think in the future is going to be the campaign for your next book?
I would say that I will start that campaign in September.
Oh, great. And you had the manuscript for Tears of the Assassin prior to starting that campaign for that book.
Correct.
It sounds like you've got your outline, you've got some sort of character studies and a general idea of where you're going with the sequel. Do you plan to have that manuscript finished when you start the campaign, or is that the kind of thing you're going to be working on simultaneously?
I think I will be working on it simultaneously. When I found Inkshares, I already had, the whole thing was done. It was, except for what Inkshares did with me, further editing it, mostly copy editing it. The story was all done, and I had professional editors who helped me, so that was done. But this time, what I came to discover through Inkshares is that there were a number of authors who were doing funding campaigns who had not yet finished their book, and that just hadn't occurred to me. But now, that I think about, well, okay, the time spent during the campaigning could also be time spent completing the manuscript, because I can put up enough chapters that people can see where this is going. So you're looking at your total time investment, and if you say, no, I won't start the campaign until I finish the book, then, okay, you're going to kind of extend it months when the campaign is going to be months anyway. You know what? You keep drawing parallels to teaching, is that sometimes you're asked, will you take on this new course? And you think, oh my gosh, I got to do the whole course. Well, actually, you just have to be several weeks ahead of the students. And if you're needing to create material that's going to be taught, in 3 to 4 weeks from now, well, then you can be doing that. And so you could take on a course that suddenly becomes available, because you're going to be able to create the material ahead of that. And by the time the class is done, well, you're well done by then. So I take that model and I think, okay, I'll be probably 2/3 of the way through writing it by September. I'll have the last third to do. And I can have that last third while the campaign is going on. And then when the campaign is complete and they're ready for a copy edit, I will have completed the manuscript.
Makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it's sort of just looking at what's the practical way in which you can achieve all things.
Absolutely. So we've been going for about 40 minutes. I want to ask you some questions about what you're reading, what you'd like to read, if there's anything that's caught your eye recently.
Yes. So I do want to give a little shout out to one of my favorite authors, and that's Mark Graney. And he has written a series of thrillers using a character referred to as the Gray Man. And I recommend that series to anyone who says, gee, what's a good thriller? The Gray Man series is excellent. So the other one I want to mention to you is another Inkshares author, and that's a gentleman by the name of Peter Ryan. Mm-hmm. And his debut novel is called Sink City. And it's a science fiction thriller, and it has to do with a dystopian future, and there is this mechanism that creates what's called a time fracture. And then the time fracture allows different acts to be either committed in the future or corrected in the past. And so what is the actual time? What is true time and what is future and past time are all kind of mishmashed, and he has a character who is like a time cop who tries to stop these time fractures or find out if a crime occurred in the future or a crime occurred in the past. And his character is hilarious.
Oh, great.
Because it's not a comedy, but he's just a very droll, dry character, kind of a throwback in this future. And so I read all that he put online with Inkshares, and it was fabulous. And I've received my copy of the book, and so as soon as I'm done with Mark Graney, I'm going to be diving into the Peter Ryan.
Awesome, that's wonderful. So that's the Gray Man series and
the Gray Man series, Sink City by Peter Ryan. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, those are two more books in a series, I suppose, that I'll be adding to my to-read list, which is miles long at this point.
Yeah, I bet it is. Yeah, I bet yours is, because what you're doing is fabulous, to give authors a forum in which to be able to share with readers and potential and future readers insights into their process.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. The whole exercise started as a mechanism through which I could record my opinions about books, because I found I was reading so quickly that I was forgetting what I'd read, and it sort of turned into more than a hobby. And now it's sort of the conscious direction of my future. So I appreciate that edification a lot.
Sure, that's great.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with me today. It's been really interesting, and I look forward to your next campaign.
Okay, so one thing I just want to share is that remember that Schiele is spelled Schiele.
Did I misspell it in the review?
Well, no, you did not.
Oh, thank you.
I'm just spelling it for listeners.
Excellent.
No, you did not misspell it, just for listeners, because they might go to the Facebook or to Twitter or to the web, because I've got the website, the Facebook, the Twitter, all of that, and it's Schiele, William Schiele.
Excellent. And so your website is williamschiele.com?
Correct. Yeah.
And then on Twitter you are, I believe, Schiele
Author. Correct.
Cool. And I'll include all of this information in the post beneath this audio. But listeners, should you be closing your eyes and listening to the dulcet tones, we're just going to spell it out for you. Well, fantastic. Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a wonderful learning experience, and thanks for the book. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elon. I appreciate it very much. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.